Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Melissa.
And my name is Tracy, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Amanda Bates, employer branding strategist, storyteller, and transitions consultant who happens to be a third culture kid from the United States who spent her growing up years in Cameroon. In this episode, Amanda shares about returning to the U.S. for university and how she hated college and discovered that her Black identity did not fit into any box. Listen to how she turned all that was hard into soft skills like counseling, guiding, and even creating her own brand to help normalize Black expatriation. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 2 of Amanda's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is our part 2 of our interview with Amanda Bates, who is the creator and founder of the Black Expat website, and she's also the host of the Global Chatter podcast. We're so thrilled to have you back on, Amanda. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm glad to be back.
And if you want to hear a more extended introduction of Amanda, go ahead and listen to our part 1 episode if you haven't. And otherwise, I'm going to let Amanda introduce herself, especially as a TCK, a third culture kid. And that's the series we're doing right now. Actually, this is the last episode in that series. So savor it. Let's savor the TCK-ness. So Amanda, can you tell us, what are you doing these days and where do you live now? And then remind us where you lived abroad and how long you were there, and kind of the whys and wheres of that TCK experience abroad.
Sure. As one can probably tell from my accent, I'm American, and I'm currently in the U.S., in the South, which I, for whatever reason, will not move above the Mason-Dixon line, for those who know where that is. But that being said, I'll move west, but I won't move up. But anyway, that's another story. So I currently am in branding and marketing for a large international bank, because whether I'm abroad or I'm in the States, I like to be kind of plugged into the global community. But before all of that, I was a TCK that grew up in Cameroon. So I lived in the U.S. until the age of 10. My parents, who were originally Cameroonian citizens, repatriated to the Francophone speaking part, even though they're from the Anglophone English speaking region of the country from the U.S. And so I spent my formative years, which was middle and high school. So started middle school in Cameroon, graduated high school. At the time, my high school graduating class was the third graduating class.
Oh, that's a fun fact.
Right.
And you were a graduating class of 15.
Yes. And I repatriated to the U.S. at the age of 17 to go to a very large state institution. And I have been working out my TCK-ness since then.
So tell us a little bit about that initial transition back to life in the U.S. after being in Cameroon.
Yeah, so it was difficult, which is funny because I think I started the last episode that moving to Cameroon was difficult.
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
I think, as anyone knows, being a middle schooler is difficult no matter where you are. I think being a young adult moving is even just as difficult, and difficult for different ways. So
Sure.
to kind of set the scene, I moved back to the U.S. without my family. So my family stayed in Cameroon. I mean, they would eventually come, at least most of my family, because my parents would eventually divorce. But I came by myself when I was 17. So I had been in a smaller international school at the time, had a small graduating class, kind of knew everyone, knew everything that was going on. And then, it was a bit of intentionality on my part, which I wish someone had kind of talked me out of it in going into a big state school. And the reason was that, I really wanted like the big American experience, wanted to go to football games, all of that.
Yeah.
Because at the time, this will totally date me, but I don't care. 90210 was a really big show. And like that was people would record it on VHS. This is really dating me. And we would watch the reruns from the
We can
summer.
relate. It's
Right.
okay.
Right. And so I wanted that experience. But the challenge that no one had told me is that when you go to a large state school, most of the students are going to be from that state, which makes absolute sense, right? But once again, I was
Sure.
17. But that also
Yeah.
meant that they had, in many cases, a built in network because they were coming from the same high schools, and these were much
Right.
bigger high schools and communities. And
They're more likely local. True.
there you go. So what the challenge was is that, during the weekends, people already kind of had their networks, especially if they didn't live that far from the campus. And it was
Mhm.
really difficult that particular first year because I didn't have my family here. So there were no parents here.
Mhm.
There's nothing that was familiar. There were, I was going through winter for the first time since I was a kid by myself, which is really hard when you've been in the tropics. So, like, kind of seasonal changes there.
Mhm.
I think understanding and adjusting to being at a big campus, didn't have a driver's license at that time. And it was
Mm.
just like all the things, I always talk about that movie, Everything All at Once. It was all at once, literally everything was happening.
Yeah.
And so it it felt hard too because I had the experiences of living abroad. Most of the people around me did not. I
Mhm.
also, because I sounded American, there was a lot of cultural cues I missed that people assumed that I knew, but I was not in the country for because, there were things they would reference, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I have no idea. And even up until this age, there are things that they reference from the time I was out of the country, and I go, I have no idea what you're actually talking about as far as that show is concerned.
I missed that one.
I wasn't here for that. And then I think then when you come down to identity, particularly around Black identity, I didn't really fit quite in a box, right? So I lived in a predominantly Black country. I came back. There were certain things culturally I just didn't relate to because I did not have a Black American experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember having quite a few arguments with folks who were like, "Well, why do you say you're African American?" I'm like, "Literally, I just came from Africa and I'm first gen." Like it's not it
Right.
wasn't and there's not to get into that. There's politicalness around those terms, particularly for these groups, right? So
Mhm.
it wasn't a denial of being Black or American. It was just like literally I'm first generation. Like it's not
Right.
like
Your parents
right.
came directly from Africa, and you were the first generation born here.
Yeah. Yes.
So tell us, is there anything else you want to share about what was hard about the transition?
So here's what was good about it being hard, which helped me later on. Um, this is actually what helped me with my first really major job. So what feels like a million moons ago, I used to be director of a nonprofit program that would help students who were the first ones in their families to go to college.
Mhm.
Most of these students were Black and brown, right? Probably about 95%. And one of the things that made me really good at that job is because, honestly, I think I'd been so introspective about my TCK experience that I could help these students. And what do I mean by this? So my parents had gone to university in the US. I mean, they didn't go college age, but they had gone. So I had that in my story. And I remember when I would talk to many of these kids about going to college, they would just be like, I have no idea how to make this work because nobody in my family has gone, right? And I was like, tell
Mhm.
me about your experience. And they're like, it's weird, right? Like people are using these words I don't understand. I'm like, I understand. They would say, there are these acronyms I've never heard. I'm like, I understand. And they're like, people hear the way I talk and they just assume that I'm going along with the conversation and I'm lost. And I'm like, I understand. I was like, you're literally trying to understand the social cues and the norms, even though you look like everyone else who's out here. And so, what
Mhm.
was really interesting is that even though I came from a family where my parents had been college and university educated, and I was working with students who didn't come from that, I could tap into what was hard about me navigating to work with those students, right? I had to try and figure out how to navigate a college campus because literally my family wasn't here. And
Mhm.
because I kind of built that muscle, it actually became easier to help students who were not TCKs, but literally the first ones on their camp, and their families doing it.
Yeah.
Because I literally was like, I completely understand what you're going through for a completely different reason, right?
Yeah, which is great.
So,
It's
so did it help? Yes. And I would tell, I mean, I did that job for like a decade and I still talk to those students. So they graduated. So there you go. There
They
you go.
did. They made it.
Some of them
Thank
got
you.
master's degrees. So yeah.
Well, I love that the hard thing that you went through has turned into something that has allowed you to help other people. So, can you look back and think about what helped you to get through those hard seasons?
I think it's just all, my friends, all of us being in the same age in the same boat.
Hmm.
And I had friends that we kind of talked through. There's distance now, right? So I can look back and saying
Yes.
the resources and the access were not the same, right? I think even the conversation around mental health and mental wellness, we know is just not, was no, you can't even compare. But I think
Right.
it was very helpful, even in just talking to another 19-year-old who's been through it, right? Because do we all necessarily have the solutions? No. But I think just being affirmed that it's not
Hmm.
just you, I think was
Hmm.
very key. I always thought people were weird because they would say, college is the best years of your life. And I go, if that was the best time of your life, then I'm really sad about what your life was like looking like because I hated college. But,
Hmm.
but where it got good for me, it took several years. And in this time, my parents
Mm.
divorced, and there's some time that I took away and then came back. Where it got good were two specific reasons. One is that I moved into the international dorm.
Mm.
And two, I joined the African Student Union.
Okay.
And both of those helped. Obviously, with the internationals dorm, then I'm around Americans and internationals that have some kind of global story. So it was very easy to kind of network and kind of, find my place there
Yeah.
because we all had this not quite in the box, different
Yeah.
experience. Not all of us were Black, but we all had these very similar experiences around moving and identity, and that wrapped up the college experience for me because that was a group I was with for the last 2 years.
Mm. Mhm.
Excellent.
And it's another example we've had other people share similar kind of stories that you don't always find your community immediately. Sometimes you have to make a change and find the people that you need by moving to a different dorm, changing, for joining a different group, something. So it doesn't always happen right away.
Well, I was gonna say the funny thing is the one person that I'm still the closest to from college, she wasn't in the international dorm with me, but she's such an interesting person. She's once again someone who her dad was American, her mom was Belgian, her dad was in the military. She grew up in Western North Carolina in the most rural, like mountains,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
she would have been a CCK. And she's someone I still connect with because she ended up, it's typical. She ended up marrying an Italian she met at Vanderbilt when she went to get her PhD. And now she's raising her Belgian American Italian daughter in the Netherlands, right? And she's like all the things. And I'm like, of
Yeah.
course we made sense in college because you're like all the weird things and all the weird
Right.
moves, right? So yeah.
Amanda, you just mentioned the acronym CCK. Tell us about that.
Cross-cultural kid. So maybe it's the third edition of the book, Growing Up Amongst World's Third Culture Kids, where they added the term CCK. And I think that describes a lot of kids. So these are kids who they don't necessarily have to move, but they are between cultures. So if I use myself, for example, when I was a kid before I moved to Cameroon, yes, I was born in the US. Yes, I'm in my passport culture, but within my home, it was very much Cameroonian culture. So they could be going between different cultures from outside the home and in the home. They could have parents of two different cultures. So I think that what happened with CCK, which I love, is that it opened up a lot more young people who have these experiences, and that there could be a language for it, because
Mhm.
I think that there's so many places where students even or young people are not necessarily moving, but they are impacted by the movements that either their parents have made or where they sit culturally. And I think it's really interesting with the rise of people going self-directed that a lot of things I bring up in the Black expat space, whether it's through the podcast, whether it's through the virtual events that I do, whether it's through what I write or whatever, people have to sort of think about identity and how they step into other spaces in a way that they've never thought before. And it is
Mhm.
absolutely fascinating. Then when you add kids on top of it, because keep in mind, most of these folks, if they were not, would not know what a TCK is. So I find myself kind of
Mhm.
doing that education around what that third culture kid experience is, right? And and also, quite frankly, what does it mean when you move a kid at 5 versus at 15 versus at 17? Like, all of those factors are things where
Mhm.
I find myself doing a lot of that. And the other thing too is that I think people gravitate because there's still not very much literature on Black TCKs.
Mhm.
And parents reach out to me quite a bit because they're still not about those nuances, especially when we look at repatriation, um,
Yeah.
and where their children are choosing to go to college. And are they coming back? Like, if they're American, are they going to come back to the States? Are they going to go somewhere else? And
Mhm.
I've definitely talked to parents in interviews who made their children made a different choice than to come back to the States.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, Amanda, just out of curiosity, would you recommend a Black university student, a TCK, to go to a historically Black university or college?
You know, it's super interesting. I think it's tricky, and I think it's tricky depending on how the Black kid grew up.
Mhm.
I think it really depends on what that kid, and I would say this for any kid though, what do they need at that time? Because for some kids, it could be difficult because maybe they grew up so far out of, just because it's a Black culture doesn't mean it's their Black culture,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so
Sure.
and that can be a challenge. And for some kids, they need that, right? I mean, it statistically overall, if you look at HSBCUs, uh, they produce the highest number of like Black professionals in medicine and STEM and business, like across the board. Like, they're the
Mm.
ones that lead in kind of doing that. But you're still in America. And so it really it's just a matter of what that kid needs. And so once again, I used to be a college counselor, so part of me is like, let's sit down and talk about your priorities and let's talk about what you need, and then we'll go from there. Yeah.
So, your website and your podcast is an amazing resource for Black and Brown expats who are thinking about going or are there abroad outside their home country. When did you start that?
It's so funny because as hard as the transition coming back was, and even as hard as the transition going was, a lot of that's what ended up influencing the work that I do now. So I unironically started it February 1st, 2016, which is Black History Month in the US. Not because I planned it, but because I was delayed in doing something, and then I it was Black History Month. And the story behind that's there are a couple of things. Number one, I told you I was working for that nonprofit, and I knew that I was about to shift moving to the Middle East. And I always said to my students, when you get to college, because I just assumed they'd go, when you go to college, study abroad. It'll change your life. Me living abroad changed my life. This is good for you. And they would all say, Miss Amanda, I don't know anyone who looks like us who lives abroad who's not in the military. And I was like, what do you mean? There are all kinds of Black people that live abroad, right? For all kinds of reasons, which is not just the military. And so I reached out
Mhm.
to a number of Black professionals who do intercultural work that I respect and have been doing it for a while and said, is there anything that just normalizes and talks about the Black experience? Like, this doesn't have to be like pie in the sky. It could just be like life. And they all came back and said no. So I was like, well, guess what? I'm just going to do this thing. It's like throwing spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give these students normal stories of just people moved for love, people moved because they got a job, people moved because they were adventurous. And so in the early years, a lot of it was solely around just stories. And there's been an evolution for that and since then. At the same time, I was also thinking about like my parents' generation of Black folks who have been moving for forever, but they were not centered in a lot of the expat literature, right? And so you don't see the experiences, and particularly you don't see them positive around African expatriation, Caribbean expatriation, even Black American expatriation. There's some nuance when you're looking at France, particularly in Paris, but a lot
Hmm.
of times the narrative is around something negative. They're fleeing
Yeah.
racism, they're fleeing war, they're fleeing conflict, they're fleeing famine. It's never just, I guess I just wanted to study in Germany or I fell in love with an Italian or
Yeah.
whatever. And so I wanted to create a space where, once again, these things are normalized because how we talk about Black expatriation, like, and it still annoys me to this day because even when I get asked for interviews with major publications, it always starts with well, what are Black Americans fleeing? And I'm like, I know plenty of them who just want to move to Bali, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I started the Black Expat. And it's funny to kind of look back at almost 10 years. It really was just so much of anything that came out at the time was so negative and started from a position of negativity as opposed to a position of strength. I wanted to flip that
Mhm.
narrative.
Yeah.
What's been really interesting is that with platforms changing, with social media change, that there's so many more wonderful, nuanced stories that weren't before, and people are using different platforms. And
Mhm.
so I then made a slight pivot from the stories on the website, which is why the stories moved to the podcast, because I wanted people to hear people's, how they sound and their excitement and everything else through that, to more of the prescriptive and more of the this is how you don't mess up the experience or things that you need to think about. Because, as I was saying to you guys earlier, we're seeing so much more people going self directed, and it's a whole
Mhm.
new world. So
Yeah.
I think that in what the opportunities that people have right now, they need the resource of kind of that unvarnished, unbiased, I'm not trying to sell you, a pot of
Mm.
gold. Like, this is how you got to make this experience be worthwhile because there's enough of kind of the inspirational, like, you can do it stuff now.
Yeah.
But you need
Yeah.
to kind of hear okay, after you take that photo in front of the Eiffel Tower and you move to Paris and it looks great and you've got a beret and you've got a baguette, you need to talk about French bureaucracy and how to pay your bills. And so that's where
Right.
I'm kind of filling that gap because I think that we're just going to continue to see this. And I think this is in any sector of expatriation, irrespective of having Black identity or not.
Tell us a final story about how your time abroad continues to add value to your life now.
Yeah, I alluded to this before. So no matter where I am, I'm still global, right?
Mhm.
So from a professional standpoint, I have always found opportunities that keep me cross-cultural and connected to groups that may have different experiences from me, but that's really important, right? So I moved west and I moved to New Mexico. I didn't know the Southwest. I had, at that time, very little interaction with Hispanic communities, except for when I think I was young, I had a Latina babysitter for like a short minute. And, a lot of the ways I was able to relate to those students was really because of my experiences and being able to kind of pivot and adjust and kind of find those commonalities. And I think every professional opportunity I've had has intentionally been some way to be connected to the world globally and bigger than where I am. And so like today, I like the international banks because when I step into the elevator at work, you could hear about 15 different languages, right? There are people from
Yeah.
all over the world who worked for that entity, right? And the previous entity that I worked for, it was the same thing. Even when I was in academia, I found a way and made a way to be able to get on the campus in the Middle East. It was not an advertised
Uh-huh.
thing. It was not a program, but I was able to get a role because one of the professors that knew me knew my background and said, actually, we probably could get you over there because you would be comfortable in X, Y, and Z in this environment. And so I continue to seek those opportunities, right? And that's just in my professional world. That's not counting I'm always traveling. I think in a couple of weeks, I'm heading somewhere south that I haven't been to before. And so I think my life, if you were to ask my friends who would look at me, now they'd say, yeah, she's still pretty international. Like, yeah, her zip code is in Raleigh, but she ain't here. I've never, I'm not here. So yeah.
Yeah. I love
Right.
that perspective.
You have a zip code, but you also have the whole world at your fingertip. Well, Amanda, what's one last word of encouragement or advice you can give to our listeners?
Yeah, it's super funny. Whenever I talk to parents, I always go, I'm like the ghost of TCK Christmas future. Like, this can work out well.
Aw.
Like,
Aw.
I say a lot of scary things, but I'm like, also, this can work out really well. So I think for those who are, for parents, I'm like, you're not gonna, mess your kids up. Your kids are gonna be fine. Talk through it, work through it, affirm folks, listen to the challenges, accept what you can accept and move forward. And I think for, if I'm thinking about younger TCKs, I'm like, it sorts itself out at some point. And I have to say this, being a TCK is not your full identity. And I think that's very hard, especially for the younger TCKs. And I've talked to college students who are trying to work stuff out. I'm like, saying you're a TCK doesn't necessarily tell anybody a whole lot about who you are. It talks about an experience that we can infer from. And so the important part is just that. You've had these experiences. What are you building upon that? And I think you've gotta be careful. I love a good warning. It's the counselor in me, but you gotta be careful when you just lean in on I'm a TCK as an explanation for something, because being a TCK can't explain everything
There's more to you than
than
just
just
that.
that, right?
Mhm.
So I think celebrate the experiences you've had, acknowledge, the good, the bad, and the in between, but also understand that is a building block for whatever person you want to turn into and you want to be.
Mm.
Great wisdom.
What wonderful advice. I love that your counseling background and all of the experiences you've had talking to so many people has given us so much great stuff to think about. I'm so glad we get to share your stories and your advice and your wisdom with our listeners. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda.
As we land this interview, we hope that you have been inspired by Amanda's stories of her own repatriation experiences and reflections on the building blocks of what has made her who she is today. Because of that building block of being a TCK, she is always global, no matter her zip code. She prefers to work in international spaces, can apply the lessons learned through her tough TCK transitions to empathize with people in different situations, and works to create a narrative of strength in the stories of Black expatriates through her Black Expat website and Global Chatter podcast. We are so grateful that Amanda made the time to chat with us today. And no matter what leg of the journey you're on, friends, we are so grateful you have brought us along with you.
Come back next time for a Round Trip Stories Third Culture Kids season finale, where we compile all the advice that the TCKs have given us over these past couple seasons. You won't want to miss it.
If you're enjoying our podcast, we'd love it if you would leave us a review in your podcast app. And don't forget, you can visit our website at roundtripstories.com to see photos of our guests and to join our email list. And of course, tell your friends to travel the world with us. No passport, no packing, and no goodbyes required. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.
Oh my gosh. Let me tell you one thing about the zip code, which is super funny. So my God, it might be about 10 plus years now. So I used to run with Ellen Mahoney, who leads Sea Change Mentoring, a thing called TCK chat on what was then called Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't call it the other thing. Anyway, so we had these Twitter chats, and I can't believe we pulled this off because it was kind of insane. We had 14 moderators, and it was TCKs of all ages, right? So you'd have the 18-year-olds, and then you'd have the people who were 60 who just figured out that they were TCKs and were on Twitter. And the reason I bring this up about the zip code is that at that time, I had just bought then my first house. And I had mentioned it, and everybody lost their mind that was under a certain age because they're like, oh my God, you have a house. That means you're permanent. And I'm like, no, it means I have somewhere I can store my stuff and not have to pay. That is different. And they
There you go.
I remember how much so many of them freaked out over it. That means I'm not a TCK and I'm tethered. And I'm like, nah, you'll get to that age where you're just like, I can't carry this stuff around, and I can't keep tossing stuff every time I move. We need to not do this anymore. So that's why I'm laughing at the zip code, because there was a time when I said that, and some of my TCK folks would freak out, but now I think all of them of age where they started buying houses.
Yeah.
And they've got kids, right? They're like, I think I need a house. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.